Let's talk data. Every person in the business intuitively understands the power and potential of data and analytics. I say intuitively because that's not enough for the business to get value out of data as a tech investment. And I'll come back to that. On the other hand, every technologist seems to think that their data job is to build a lake or warehouse, put some self-service reporting on top, and they're done. When the business inevitably goes on and on about needing data, that engineering brain just points them to the general use lake where all the data lives and no one wins. I'm not suggesting that there aren't great data specialists in tech, people who master and govern data, people who use fancy words like data lineage and metadata, and who actually care about data quality and consistency. There are. And their work is usually disconnected from real business value, because business value comes from changing business processes, not from having a warehouse or lake, not from having Tableau or Power BI on top of it. Business value comes from embedding the entire data lifecycle as a workflow end to end in your company's operational workflow. It's data supply chain that starts with sales and ends with ops. So the usual tools we in tech focus on, our master data repositories or consolidated analytics platforms, our fancy warehouses and lakes, they're all at best have answers. Until data is a ubiquitous part of the daily business workflow, not the tech workflow, you don't have an answer. As a CIO, it's never enough to invest in a system that allows the business theoretically to ask any question they need of all the data in the company. If tech builds that field of dreams, the business will not come. Why? The problem is rooted in senior leadership in both tech and biz, defining data and analytics as a technical/talent/governance problem that tech owns rather than a process problem and operating model problem that the business owns. Most business users ask for data like it's a tool. Well, it is and it isn't. For that tool to be effective, you need to change business process. You need to change the operating model of the business in a way that fundamentally redefines the way the business works. As much as every new CIO would love to invest heavily in data platforms and people to build out data infrastructure and to staff it with really expensive engineers and data scientists, that's trying to change a process, the businesses from the outside in. We keep talking about this. It never works. Tech is left on the hook for major spends that consistently fail to deliver measurable business benefits. Even when the CIO delivers exactly what was asked of them, they still failed because it was the wrong ask. The right ask with regard to data, business ownership of a business transformation. You need business partners, relationships who will change their operating discipline to be data-centric, who will ask different questions of their people and processes that will make different demands of tech, that will drive real business outcomes. I can't say this enough. Data problems are never at their core about implementing technology or managing data infrastructure. They're about building relationships with business leaders, understanding their business goals, and then guiding them on how to own data, not delegate it to tech. Ask hard questions. Ask your business partners to define the top 10 questions that they can't answer today, not high level, ground level, questions that if answered would change commercial outcomes. 10's a small number, but it's 10 more questions than most data warehouse projects have. Prioritize those 10 and build your execution plan around them, not around answering any potential questions, those 10. Then help your partner change the business processes that have relied on that data being out of reach. Automate that workflow and build your infrastructure and governance iteratively around those processes. It's necessarily virtuous work to establish strong data governance practices to ensure data quality and security for your entire data supply chain, to have thoughtful end-to-end processes for data collection, storage, and access, to define roles and responsibilities for data management. But I said this in week 1, and it's worth saying again, you don't transform a business from the outside in. So you need to help your business develop a business framework for making data-driven decisions to drive business success from the inside. That's an operating model transformation. day 16 reading list. I'm going to be cautious on this one because pointing you to a book about Python or R, or pointing you to a book about data science, which I'm about to do, or data governance, I'll unintentionally narrow your focus and lead you down the path of being a data specialist. And what the business needs is a data generalist, someone who is equal parts data nerd and business process specialist, a different kind of nerd. That said, book one, Data Science for Business by Foster Provost and Tom Fawcett. This one emphasizes the importance of understanding the data supply chain. It's still a bit narrow because it focuses on data collection, cleaning, integration, transformation, which are all part of the tech end of the data supply chain. So you need to supplement it with a book about operating model transformation. That's book two, The Business Transformation Playbook by Keith Gasquione. I don't know how to say his last name. You can also sub that out is there's a book or white paper about your specific industry's target operating model. And finally, on the multimedia front, check out a YouTube walk I did called Data and Analytics, Questions to Ask a Business Stakeholder. It's worth the watch. That's it for day 16. What's the difference between a CIO and a Chief Digital Officer, CDO? And what's the CIO's role in driving digital transformation? First, if your company has both a CIO and a CDO, someone at the top didn't fully understand the role of a CIO, or there was some political garbage going on. Well, just think about the word digital and Chief Digital Officer. Everything in tech is digital. So if you're going to have a Chief Digital Officer, the CIO's title should be changed to the Chief Analog Officer. If your company has both roles, it usually means that the CIO narrowed their focus so much as to crowd out the company's client experience, client voice, and or the company's employee experience. Luckily, that's not the case with my current company. Yay. So, second question, what's a CIO's role in driving digital transformation? Step one is never tech, because before you automate processes, before you digitize them end to end, you need an inventory of existing business processes and a detailed view of how they connect end to end. There's a very good chance they don't connect or do through semi-automated, non-documented tribal processes. And even if you have that list, it's still not enough to get the build started. You also need business buy-in on tomorrow's operating. One of the books to read from yesterday. The difference between your current inventory of processes to digitize and tomorrow's operating model is that the latter is a smaller, thoughtful, rationalized inventory for what ought to be, not what is. Plus, that list needs to be prioritized based on risk and ROI in two separate buckets. Processes that a central automation group should automate top down, and processes where you expect citizen development, decentralized teams to automate their processes themselves bottom up. If those lists don't exist, tech is at least a year to 18 months from starting, at least. And that pre-work could mismanage everyone's expectations about how soon digital transformation will deliver results. Tech will inevitably get comments like, this transformation started 2 years ago, and all we have is an inventory. Everything is still manual. Nothing has changed. In those orgs, tech just did a poor job of continuously educating stakeholders on what to expect and who to expect it from. Because like the data discussion from yesterday, producing a future state operating model is something the business should own and drive. Tech should be in the car, helping, guiding, just not driving. Tech is not sitting idle during the business-driven step one of the digital transformation. While the business is focused on mapping the future state operating model end to end, tech should be actively preparing the teams and the tools for step two. That's where my two favorite words, well, my two favorite three-letter acronyms come into play, BPM and RPA. BPM, or Business Process Management, think workflow, helps organizations visualize their end-to-end process. Step one to optimizing and automating them. RPA, or Robotic Process Automation, takes it a step further by using software robots, think old school macros on crack, to automate repetitive tasks. Together, these technologies enable businesses to streamline operations, increase productivity, and then improve customer experiences. The questions to ask are, do you have the self-service versions of these? Do you have the kind of culture within the larger organization to expect citizen development? Do the non-tech people you expect to self-service have the time to do it? Will they ever have the time? When companies talk about leadership and the need to foster digital mindsets and encourage employees to embrace change, there's a training and upskilling dimension to it, but the less obvious need is free time. If you've spent the last 10 years optimizing your operations and your workforce has been shrinking with each uptick in productivity, then the business folks who you expect to be mapping and automating processes with self-service tools won't have the time, even if it's a mandate from above. One of the many reasons mandates don't work. So yeah, there will be a buy, build, integrate dimension to BPM and RPA. But equally important is the need to equip business teams with the necessary digital skills and to work with their leadership to find them time to do the actual work. Day 17 reading list. Book 1. Google HBR's 10 must-reads on leading digital transformation. If you have the $25, buy it. If you don't, just read the extract, which mentions the authors and the 10 pieces and, the titles, and then Google them. Full disclosure, I'm not a big fan of HBR for a lot of reasons, but if you're not going to tap one of the big consultancies, HBR is the fastest path to figuring out the essential principles and practices that lead to successful digital transformation. Also, when you read any HBR piece, just know that the author probably published a book on the same topic. So treat HBR as a book tasting menu. If you like the taste, go to the author's site and buy their book. Book 2, American Prometheus, The Triumph and Tragedy of J. Robert Oppenheimer by Kai Bird and Martin Sherwin. While the book is not directly about tech modernization, read it for inspiration and caution. It highlights the joys and challenges of pursuing enormous goals with the best minds. And ditto on the multimedia front, can't go wrong with Christopher Nolan, so watch Oppenheimer, which is based on that book. And then if you have the time, watch Nolan's Batman trilogy, because every CIO is Batman. That's it for day 17. How does your moral compass play into your first 100 days? The answer actually starts before you take the job, while you're still looking. I purposefully switched from banking to healthcare because I needed to connect my personal values to fight for the underdog with what I do professionally, which in banking, my previous gig, was always an uphill battle. As cliche as it sounds, I am defined by my career. I don't know any working professional who isn't, but my career doesn't give me my sense of direction. It shouldn't. It's the other way around. So before you switch jobs, recognize that when the company you work for isn't helping shape the world in a way that aligns with your values, you've made the wrong trade-offs. When meaning doesn't drive your job search, when it's about money or status, you'll be forced into buying ideas like work-life balance, because there will necessarily be a disconnect between work and life. For me, because my values align with my new gig, my work is meaningful. I'm energized by it, even when it's rough. And I realize how privileged a life I lead. Because if you have the privilege of having a white-collar job that aligns with your definition of purpose and your values, you can easily blur work and life. That's much harder if you're in a blue-collar role. It's privilege that allows me to sustainably find motivation, productivity, job satisfaction. So it's critical when you have that privilege, exercise it with an ambition to improve the world, to serve the less privileged. Once you're on the job, hopefully a purposeful job, then your moral compass should serve as a guiding tool for making ethical decisions, for being kind, for taking actions that align with your company's hopefully shared values. Look, I don't know of any leader I respect who doesn't live their values, who doesn't understand the impact of purpose. But I do know a lot of us that let our company's mission become our purpose. We bought the BS because it paid well. Those leaders talk a mean game on topics like courage, but they remain silent on important topics that will impact their company's short-term commercial ambitions. I can't tell you how disheartened you can become when your senior leadership sees injustice as they define it and chooses to stay silent to keep some clients. That's not a purposeful company. I recommended a book, I think it was like week 1, called Net Positive by former Unilever CEO Paul Pullman. Makes a powerful case for how and why purposeful companies led by courageous leaders do better in the long term because they help change the world for the better. So your moral compass is something you never expected it to be, a commercial boon. It should inform your organizational culture, your employee engagement, decision-making, strategic planning, goal setting, everything. It's the most meaningful thing you bring to the game. So find a place where you can live your values and live your values through your daily act. Day 18 reading list. Book 1 is my favorite business book of all time. Manifesto for a Moral Revolution by Jacqueline Novogratz. Here's what sets this one apart for me. No other business book has ever made me ugly cry. Enough said. TMI, actually. Book number 2, Winners Take All by Anand Giridharadas. If you're going to be a part of capitalism, it's kind of on you to help shape capitalism. What this book adds is the idea that corporate philanthropy ain't the answer. This guy's playing chess with corporate social responsibility when most well-meaning companies are investing a lot in checkers. And finally, on the multimedia front, even though it's not Christmas, watch It's a Wonderful Life. The reason we all kind of lose it at the end is not because of Christmas. It's because we all value community, kindness, selflessness. We just need to bring that to the office the way George did. Anyway, that's it for day 18. Been thinking a lot about professional development, my teams and my own. Let's start with what I'm doing for me to stay current with the industry and to, always be in a tech-forward position. 3 things. I'm reaching out to my peers, the people who do my job at my company's competitors, the obvious ones and the digital newcomers. I get the list off the web, jump into LinkedIn and send invites with a simple message. We're playing in the same space. Let's play together. It'll improve both our games. I get like 70% acceptance rates. The other 30% probably did the worst possible thing for themselves and their companies. They stopped checking LinkedIn after they landed their job. Bad move. Second thing I do, I reach out to the experts, people who are explicitly paid to read themselves into a forward position, the big consultancies. And I mean, alphabetically, Accenture, Bain, BCG, Deloitte, McKinsey, Oliver Wyman, PwC, and throw in Gartner and Forrester. I send a message to relationships I've grown over the years. Hey, got a new gig. What can you teach me about it? Who can you introduce me to? Response rate, 100%. Because 1, I'm a relationship, and 2, relationships are how they make money eventually. Third thing I do, I read everything I can get my hands on. That's an ask in every conversation with my peers, with consultants, direct reports, my clients, strangers, really anyone I speak with. It's become a subtle indicator for me. If a person can't recommend a book that's improving their game's not improving. How do I think about professional development for my teams? I think about all the continuous education that I'm forcing on myself, and I think, share. Set the bar high for yourself and find ways for your learning to influence others to learn. Super obvious answer, especially when you're asking people what books you should read, is a book club. Publicize that you have one. Make sure it's optional, not mandatory, because the worst kind of mandates are the well-intentioned ones. And steer towards books that will deepen everyone's understanding of the business end to end, of emerging trends, tech and biz. And this is important. If you're in a big company, read books about how small companies succeed. Trust me on that one. Second way I think about professional development for my teams, I intentionally ask them something that they can't currently do, and then ask them how I can support that kind of growth in them. You'll be surprised with their answers. Most people aren't growing because their management is asking them to be heads down 100% of the time. That doesn't help anyone in the long run. I've said this a million times. All cognitive growth comes from the right mix of challenges and support. The challenges come through an explicit ask, do something that you don't know how to do. The support comes from you, creating safe spaces for others to learn, to fail. That's the ultimate stretch goal. Fail as you learn to fly. It's the only path to flight. Day 19 reading list. This first one needs a disclaimer. I took a class with this Harvard professor when I was a grad student at MIT, a real school. And this dude changed how I think about everything. His name is Robert Keegan. And back in the 90s, his book called In Over Our Heads, Mental Demands of Modern Life, wasn't particularly accessible to people in corporate America. He'd probably disagree with that. Since then, though, he's become an essential read for anyone who cares about their people. If you haven't read An Everyone Culture, because over here, Becoming a Deliberately Developmental Organization, just stop scrolling and order it. It's worth the money and the time. Book 2, Quiet, The Power of Introverts in a World That Can't Stop Talking by Susan Cain. Enough said on that one. And finally, if you're more of a podcast person, Google Coaches Rising, Robert Keegan, and you'll find an episode where Bob talks about the book you should read. That's it for day 19. Let's talk skills assessment and gearing ratios, because that's one of the two strongest determinants of how fast you can run. In tech, skills can be boiled down to 5 broad categories: software developer, hardware engineer, business analyst, program manager, senior manager. I know I just offended like a million of you. What about architects? What about cyber? What about risk? Look, you're all important, but in the larger clockwork, you're important smaller gears. The CIO has to tune before they fine tune. Now, I'd normally say, go talk to HR to get the skills assessment, but I know they won't have it. No fault of their own. HR never gets the budget to climb past the critical stuff: recruiting, payroll, benefits, the performance management. Would every HR person on the planet immediately invest in training beyond compliance training and development, real cognitive development? Absolutely. And that day might never come. So instead of asking for skills data, ask your HR partner for help with a skills assessment survey. Mine's going to be simple and focus on what I value most: end-to-end business knowledge. So question number 1, which of these 5 roles do you play? Question number 2, which internal system or tech process do you know better than everyone else? Question 3, on a scale of 0 to 5, 0 being you know nothing, 5 being you're a deep expert, how would you rate yourself on the following business processes? And then you list as many business processes as you can, which will also be a problem because process inventories don't grow on trees. We talked about that as a challenge earlier this week. It's a prerequisite for digital transformation, a process inventory. If you don't have a process inventory, keep the skills assessment high level for round 1. So what do you do with skills assessment data? You figure out 1, gearing ratios, 2, single person risk, 3, what we talked about yesterday, professional development, because everyone's career can improve the more they understand the business end to end. Jumping back to 1 though. The term gearing ratios is borrowed from finance, and over there, it's a comparison of a company's equity to its debt. In tech, it's the ratio on a project-by-project basis of software engineers, the equity, to business analysts and program managers, the debt. Most BAs and PMs hear that and think, hey, wait a minute, I'm just as valuable as any engineer. And you are. maybe even more so. I'm just trying to explain gearing ratios. So why would a CIO need to understand the ratio? Because in most orgs, that's an excellent indicator, not just of how efficient tech is, but more importantly, how mature the business is and whether its operating model has been optimized to be a good steward for technology spend. That's a fundamental CIO paradox. Tech is only as effective as the business operating model that it supports. So one of the CIO's unspoken roles is to help mature the business, an operating model transformation that leads the business to be better, to be a better consumer of tech, if nothing else. The other benefit to getting skills assessment data, single person risk. It's why you ask everyone which internal system or systems do you know better than everyone else. Just sort on unique snowflake answers, and you're looking at your next multi-day outage. That's the best kind of investment opportunity in professional development. Day 20 reading list. Earlier this week, I think Tuesday, I recommended an HBR compilation. I'm going to do that again today. And just like I said before, if you want to buy them as compilations and make Harvard even richer, great. If you don't, just read the extract, which will mention the authors of the 10 pieces and the titles, and then just Google them. Treat HBR as a book tasting menu. If you like the taste, go to the author's site and buy their book. So, which HBR compilations today? The first, Google HBR's 10 must-reads on mental toughness. Or just pick up Angela Duckworth's book, Grit. Second, Google HBR's must-reads on emotional intelligence. Or just pick up any fawning biography of Elon Musk and do the opposite he would do in every situation. And finally, if you're more of a podcast person, Angela Duckworth, who I mentioned, has a podcast called No Stupid Questions. In full disclosure, I stopped listening to it on principle. The principle being that my favorite questions in life are stupid questions. Mine, actually. And I don't need someone telling me it's not stupid when I'm comfortable that it is. If someone wants to start a podcast called Ask Only Stupid Questions, so we all know how little we know, I'd be your first subscriber. Okay. End of month one, I just sent out 6 boxes of cookies to some top performers, and I haven't met 5 of them yet. In person, I mean. Each box had a personalized note that was me being grateful in a human way, not corporate speak, for some recent outperforming results. All 3 of those words are important. Recent outperforming results. With me being a coach, explicitly calling out the behavior that led the person to be recognized and filled with cookies. Plus, I'm feeling grateful for the people I manage. So it's a good time to talk about what it means to lead and motivate. Gratitude is hard, mostly because it needs to be done in real time with authenticity, with a deliberately developmental mindset. Remember Bob Keegan from earlier in the week? And gratitude needs to be done in the context of explicit company goals and values. The people who get it right, who create a positive and motivating work environment where employees feel valued, maybe even inspired to perform their best, those people work on it. It's a skill, a muscle. It gets stronger as you exercise it. I personally struggle with it. Thanking individuals publicly has always struck me as disingenuous. I do it, but it feels, well, it doesn't feel right. It feels like a TV ad. People are too sophisticated in my mind, too jaded to be moved by ads. So it takes real effort, for me at least, to provide meaningful feedback, to pick out rewards and incentives that are transactional, Amazon gift card, that build a culture that fosters a sense of belonging, boosts morale, and strengthens relationships within the team. That's hard. And despite what Hallmark will sell you, not particularly rewarding if you're not a warm and fuzzy kind of person. But gratitude is one of the 2 most important parts of the job. More important than setting a strategy or executing with speed or managing a budget, because you're sitting in a seat that others aspire to sit in. Modeling gratitude respects the seat. keeps you humble. And when you're humble, you're open to learning and growing from others. That uncomfortable feeling is you leading, growing. Looking forward to week 5. Cybersecurity. It's like watching an eclipse. You don't stare directly at the sun. You hire the smartest person you can afford who stares at it for you, or better yet, builds a team that does. But you as the CIO need to think in terms of business impact, client impact. I promised on day 0 to focus on one issue per day, but talking cyber will break that promise because its business impact needs you to think about everything. Business continuity, disaster recovery, third-party risk management, incident management, client comms, regulatory impact, literally everything your company does. Let's do a speed run through the first 3 because they're the most important. Business continuity. You need detailed plans that outline how your company, not just tech, will continue operating during and after an incident. You need to conduct realistic simulations to test your firm-wide response. You need to ensure that everyone in the company, again, not just tech, knows how to stop, drop, and roll during the fire. You need to focus on every dimension of your operational resilience and that of your partners and vendors. And that's just business continuity, one tiny piece of the larger cyber puzzle. 2, disaster recovery, which sounds a lot like business continuity, but is a field unto itself. If I'm speaking Klingon, business continuity is about people, processes, and facilities, while disaster recovery, DR, is about tech, data, systems, platforms. For DR, you need up-to-date recovery plans written in plain English so the poor guy who joined last week can actually help next week when something happens. You need to automate everything because every minute counts during an incident. You need to regularly test those DR procedures and automation to ensure they work effectively because your platforms, like your business, is constantly changing. You need to consider the systems and services that you should move to in the cloud for scalability, redundancy, resiliency, and then move them, a ton of work, and make sure that the cloud itself is constantly monitored and safe. You need to prioritize data backup and restoration, anything else that'll block your business from getting back on its feet in a reasonable time frame. What else? 3, third-party risk management. You need to care about the security practices of your vendors and partners because lightning might not strike your house, but it's going to hit critical business infrastructure in your industry. That's actually the most likely negative impact, cyber impact to your company. Business people intuitively understand the idea of a physical supply chain. What happens when the ships can't dock, when the trucks stop running, when the shelves are empty. But most people don't apply that to the larger data supply chain because if they did, they'd realize how fragile their industry is and they wouldn't sleep at night. They get these things. That's 3 things I talked about. 3 things that you could spend your entire CIO tenure on. And there are 24 other bundles of complexity that cyber attacks will force you to focus on. It's white-collar doomsday prepping without all the mason jars and without having to apologize to anyone for the wild hair because you're doing it for your clients. Day 21 reading list. Fun fact before my first recommendation. Did you know that companies that go through high-profile, publicly reported data breaches can actually improve their reputations by how they handle it? Research has shown that an average firm's brand in the markets rises by like 20% following a data breach. It's human. It's an empathetic response. You don't hear about someone getting mugged and think, well, it was their fault. And that's what a cyber attack is. It's a digital mugging. Okay, book 1, Spin Sucks. Communications and Reputation Management in the Digital Age by Jenny Dietrich. Do you know how to trigger that human empathetic response I just mentioned? Sound like a human. Be authentic, be ethical, be real. Use contractions. Not enough corporate communications uses the word ain't, and that ain't right. If companies could just get over themselves and talk like people, real people, not chatbots, they'd realize that a well-handled breach response needs to demonstrate transparency, accountability, an ongoing commitment to protecting customers, and humanity. It needs to reflect your humanity. Investing in plain talk, during and after a breach can enhance trust, or North Star. Book 2 is healthcare specific and actually another HBR article. Google High Trust Explained, one framework to rule them all. High Trust is spelled HITRUST, and I'll spell it again in the post description. High Trust is a framework that's used to unify rules from various existing regulatory and industry frameworks, including HIPAA, GDPR. It aims to simplify compliance efforts by consolidating requirements into a single source solution. Worth a read, worth a deep understanding, actually. So do more than just that one article. And finally, on the multimedia front, binge every episode of Mr. Robot. It's based on a true story. How do you navigate roles that shouldn't sit in your organization but aren't a priority for the organizations where they should sit? For instance, when we were talking about digital transformation, we mentioned the need for end-to-end process automation. We also talked about how that needs to be a living inventory of processes. Maintaining that list isn't just hard work. It's a prerequisite for tech to do our job. If that role exists on the business side, awesome. If it doesn't, it's probably because operations is busy keeping the lights on. They love a BPM view of everything they do, end to end. They just don't have the time or the budget. Two simple choices, neither good. And you need to pick the lesser of two evils. Hire the role into tech or slice off some tech budget for whoever outside tech needs to own it. I'm not a fan of the first choice because change should never happen from the outside in and it won't stick. And I'm not a fan of the second choice because if the role wasn't a priority before getting the budget, it will be one after getting it. What usually happens is option one. The CIO hires the role into their org with some negotiation around the vague time frame in which they'll transfer the function to where it needs to live. That's command and control thinking when it should be an exercise of influence. A role that shouldn't sit in tech can't start to be built in tech. I've seen that happen multiple times with product functions, risk functions, even audit. We're talking roles which should fundamentally be challenge functions to tech. They're meant to improve tech by having an outside-in perspective. Regardless of how much or how well the leaders of that function speak truth to power, the integrity of those functions are necessarily compromised when they report into the CIO. So it's important that you influence your way into having those roles created where they belong. What are you giving up? Speed of execution. Because doing it right from the get-go takes time. Because influence takes time. You're going to need a mitigation strategy until you successfully influence. And as horrifying as it sounds, you personally are the mitigation strategy. If your org is missing the product function, you personally need to play product. Same with risk, audit, compliance, whatever is missing. The only good news is that any organization that you just started leading already has tribal versions of the function that you are officially missing. Because tech before you couldn't have functioned without product, risk, audit, compliance, whatever is missing. You'll be challenged on the sustainability front because the secret to getting any job right is narrowing your focus. We've said that from day one, not picking up 2 or 3 extra roles. So influence, influence, influence. Day 22 reading list. Book 1, Range, Why Generalists Triumph in a Specialized World by David Epstein. It's one of these books that I should have recommended like week 1, filled with valuable insights for CIOs. It's a meditation on embracing diverse perspectives, how to face complex, multifaceted challenges with an interdisciplinary mindset. It's a meditation on agility in a rapidly changing business landscape. It's about creativity and problem solving, and I'm sorry it took me a month to recommend it. Book 2, Social Chemistry by Marissa King. Another book that I should have recommended week 1. It'll get you thinking about network dynamics in human networks, how to influence organizational culture, how to build meaningful stakeholder relationships, how to navigate change management, how to balance technical and social skills, just all kinds of useful. And finally, if you're more into blogs, check out one that I wrote on Super Serious called How to Manage Senior Stakeholders. Google it. or just go to Super Serious. It's based on some really interesting research out of MIT's Sloan School of Business, which you should probably also read before you read my take on it. For that piece, Google when collaboration fails and how to fix it. Super interesting read. That's it for day 22. Let's talk Helpdesk and how to level it up. You already have a ticketing system, a knowledge base. When there's a fire, they already flip the switch and become proactive, calling people, showing up at different offices, at people's desks, and they record the outcomes. So leveling up is about what you do when there's no fire. You're sitting on the greatest possible tool for proactively engaging the rest of the organization, empathetic people. In the past, how many times, if ever, did you receive a call from your help desk saying, "Hi, this is Jane from the help desk. You didn't call us. There are no fires. So I thought I'd reach out, introduce myself, and see if there are any tech questions I can answer." There's a chance that I can't answer your question, but if you give me time, I can do some learning and or chase down the appropriate people. I know I've never received that call. I'd probably hang up immediately because it's got to be a scam, right? It's some kind of vishing. No one does that. Well, you can start. Get your help desk a list of employees to call. Top of the list, new joiners, but really anyone can benefit from that call. And you, as a CIO, scale the one thing that no one thinks you can scale: active listening. So reboot your help desk. Have them proactively reach out to the organization with earnest questions about how they might help. That leads to two powerful results. The first is trust, our North Star, because your users don't expect that level of white glove service. And even when your users speak, they don't expect to be heard. So trust. Second result is a learning path for the members of your help desk that's rooted in customer demand. Maybe they want to go to software development. Now they know where the demand sits. Maybe they want to go into training, ops, product, risk. Careers, like the best businesses, can be shaped by just listening to what the market needs, answering the questions clients haven't yet asked. Look, I don't know of any CIO who does a victory lap with a story involving their help desk. They usually do laps for like large, complicated deliveries, the new data center, the move to the cloud, the adoption of some innovative solution that enhances customer experience and drives business growth. Cyber is a good victory lap. These days, cost savings deserve a lap. If you're really hard up for success stories, maybe something in governance, compliance, risk management, stuff that should be water if you're a fish. But no one focuses on the help desk. They might have during COVID, but that was an anomaly. I think that's a huge missed opportunity. Don't sit on people who know how to listen, who know how to learn, who know that most problems can be solved with a simple reboot. Day 23 reading list. Book 1, up here somewhere. The Nordstrom Way to Customer Experience Excellence. Creating a Values-Driven Service Culture by Robert Spector and Brianne Reeves. There are a handful of companies that get mentioned over and over again in books about exceptional customer service. Nordstrom is usually one of the top 5, the others being like Zappos, UPS, Chick-fil-A, REI, USAA. It's a bank for military people. Trader Joe's, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. It's worth reading. And actually, while we're on Trader Joe's, that would be a good book too. Well, there's no book called Trader Joe's, but there's a really cool book called The Secret Life of Groceries by Benjamin Lohr. It was on my list of favorite reads last year. No spoilers, just read it. It's interesting. And finally, if you're more into podcasts, try Creating Disney Magic, Lessons in Leadership, Management, and Customer Service. The host is a former Walt Disney World person, which gives him instant cred when he talks about customer service. That's it for day 23. The reason innovation is so hard is that it requires you to have a market leader mindset. Not just business depth, super important, but all the challenges associated with being the dominant player, the industry leader. There's a very good chance, always, that your company doesn't have the largest market share, the highest sales volumes, or the most diehard customer base in its industry. The literature on innovation talks a lot about focusing on a clear business strategy, a supportive culture, strong execution, et cetera, et cetera. But the way most organizations who aren't number one get there is by comparing themselves and their products and services to the market leader, which leads to commoditization and the death of competitive advantage. How do you stop playing catch up and start playing leapfrog? Well, remember that your core product is trust. When the literature tells you to always keep innovating, to constantly monitor market trends and shiny tech, there's a larger context that's missed. Customer needs. Your products and services aren't going to differentiate on the bottom of Maslow's pyramid. It's never about functionality, reliability, usability. You differentiate on the top of the pyramid in Maslow's hierarchy of needs, business depth and trust. When the literature says to focus on a specific vertical or niche, what it's really saying is that it's easier to build trust when you continuously narrow your potential audience. In other words, your job becomes easier when you target a specific segment of the market that has unmet or underserved needs. The narrower the niche, the better. By focusing on a niche, you don't just gain a deeper understanding of your customers, their pain points, their preferences. That's all important. You can also refine their trust in you from some high-level general form of trust to a more solid, sustainable, domain-focused, business expertise-driven, specific form of trust. That's not gold, that's platinum. The companies who are failing at trust are the ones who continue to sell high-level generics instead of narrowcasting. The winners are tailoring their products, continuously narrowing their underserved personas down to, if possible, an audience of one. How do you scale that? Tech. So ask yourself, how can tech help build a loyal and engaged customer base? By seeing them each as an audience of one, by seeing their pain, by establishing your company as an authority and a leader in that experience. How can tech be empathetic to help understand that individual better? Answer that, and you'll have a unique and competitive innovation pipeline. Day 24 reading list. A couple weeks back, I plugged a bunch of Clayton Christensen's book, and I used the words jobs to be done without explaining the origin of that term. Well, that's book number 1 today, Competing Against Luck, The Story of Innovation and Customer Choice by Clayton Christensen. If you want to save yourself the time, just read until you understand the significance of a milkshake during your morning commute. I'd read the whole book, though. It'll stay with you. Book 2, another classic worth reading, but I'd read it skeptically. Good to Great by Jim Collins. Reason I found it interesting is that every company was compared to a competitor that missed the mark. Abbott compared to Upjohn, Circuit City compared to Silo, Fannie Mae, Great Western, Gillette, Warner Lambert, Kroger, AMP, Nucor, Bethlehem Steel. Philip Morris. Yes, that Philip Morris. R.J. Reynolds, Pitney Bowes compared to Adressograph. Never even heard of them. Walgreens, Ecker, Wells Fargo, Bank of America. Most of them weren't great in the long view, but the peer analysis is worth your time, especially in how it helps you think through peer relative comparisons. And finally, if you're more into blogs, Google Hood. That's my first name, H-O-O-D, and The Innovation Game. Hood, The Innovation Game. It's one of my favorite pieces of my writing. And it ties back to everything I've been saying. That's it for day 24. A 3-year plan, horizon scanning, future casting. When you first land in the CIO seat, especially if you're new to the company, there is an expectation that you'll either weigh in on or create a multi-year tech-forward roadmap. That's one of the initial values of reaching out to the big consulting firms. Talked about that last week. One of the most important reasons that you spend your first 3 months understanding the business end-to-end is that 3-year tech planning really needs to be rooted in 3-year business planning. Depending on the culture of your company, that business strategy could be anywhere on the spectrum, from dynamic and flexible on one end to rigid and structured on the other. It's usually somewhere in between, with a small handful of multi-year marquee transformations, the big rocks, and enough bandwidth and agility to skate to the ever-changing business landscape. So your goal with a 3-year tech plan isn't to be everything for every project. It should be centered on improving the delivery of those multi-year marquee transformations, plus creating value in adjacent functions. So the question you'll want to answer as you continuously scan the horizon is one of prioritization. What is the value proposition, feasibility, and risk assessment with each future tech versus business goal combination? And by value prop, I mean, aside from the marketing uptick you'll get for announcing that you're AI this or blockchain that, if you're going to continuously evaluate the horizon, I'd visit and revisit how you measure and communicate the progress and outcomes of your somewhat fluid 3-year plan. Think key performance indicators, KPIs, dashboard, reports. Ideation might be fun, but it's real work to figure out how to define the metrics that will indicate the success with revenue growth, customer satisfaction, operational efficiency, or even innovation itself. It's real work to establish the frequency and format of reporting the results to your partners and stakeholders, the rest of the executive team, the board, or even employees. Fostering a culture of innovation and collaboration is 1 part ideation and 99 parts iteration, repetition, communication, execution, adoption. Any other words that end with should. The principles and practices that will guide you to innovation, customer centricity, agility, experimentation, learning. That's the hard part. Day 25 reading list. Book 1 was going to be Sapiens by Yuval Noah Harari, but there's a similar book that's infinitely better called The Dawn of Everything by David Graeber. The book was so good that when David Graeber died in 2020, the world of people who love books lost something really special. That's how good it is. While I'm being a downer, book number 2, Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor Frankl. You've probably heard of it, but until you read it, you'll remain you. And finally, if you're more into multimedia, one of my followers on TikTok asked about future casting a couple of weeks back. So I shared a super short blog on Super Series called The Breakthrough. Read that. That's it for day 25. Week 5, 1 more week left to go before I hit my 30 days. Okay. You're not playing to win explicitly yet. You're still playing to learn, which when you're playing the long game is how you win. You lead with what makes play fun, what makes learning impactful. You lead with curiosity. This past week, it was curiosity about how to lead through change, how to tap the power of the curious in your large reward. And we ended the week with curiosity about the future, the art of the possible. There's a fundamental playfulness in 3-year planning because at the heart of experimenting with new technologies, with exploring different business scenarios, with creating new markets is one of the most important keys to success. It also happens to unlock how we adapt to changing circumstances. Show me someone who wasn't curious when they first interacted with generative AI. Show me someone who didn't ask an inappropriate question of ChatGPT, and I'll show you someone limited by their lack of play, someone who would struggle with or without cool tech to provide data-driven insight, someone who'd struggle with creating operational efficiency. Curiosity and playful are critical in 3-year planning. God help you if you're bored when you're talking about strategic alignment, customer satisfaction, competitive advantage, because it doesn't get better than that. So quick revision to what I said 2 minutes ago. You're not playing to win. You're playing to play. That's how you win. Looking forward to the last week of this series.